Welcome back. Today I wanted to explore the benefits and the therapeutic benefits of water, cold water particularly. Water therapy doesn't mean necessarily walking in the cold snow. Yes, that's me walking in the cold snow, but that is not what I am proposing, although you could certainly explore that for yourself. That does require training. So you have seen many teachers around the world teaching cold water therapy, whether it's cold plunges, whether it's cold immersions, whether it's swimming in cold bodies of water. And no, you cannot simply just think your way through a frozen lake. Remember, it does take training. So what's interesting about hydrotherapy, water therapy, it roots back to the time of Hippocrates, who's considered to be the father of medicine. So it's been around for a long time. But why is it all of a sudden that it's been popularized? We're mostly water, and we have a lot of applications for water. So let's explore this relationship between water and our body physiology. When we expose our body to heat, our pores open up. When we expose our body to cold, our pores close off. So when you create that sort of relationship, you now are creating a pump. So your lymphatic system moves, your blood circulation moves, and again, heat opens up the pores where all of your blood and circulation and lymphatic flow, it moves toward the periphery to keep your brain cool. When you expose yourself to cold or cool, your blood circulation goes inward to keep your brain warm. So we're trying to really create this lymphatic and circulatory movement that really is strengthening to our immune system and in general is very therapeutic. Those are the benefits of how water affects our bodies. Now, when it comes down to cold, generally speaking, and I'm going to say it in Fahrenheit, 55 degrees of Fahrenheit has been a commonly used temperature at which the beneficial effects of water therapy have been discovered. What's really interesting is that the modern day hydrotherapy or water therapy, it dates back to one of the European descendants whose name is Vincent Priessnitz. And I wanted to share just a couple of pages from a book called Nature Doctors. Again, this is Nature Doctors written by Friedhelm, Kirchfeld, and Wade Boyle. This book was published in 1994, and then it was reprinted in 2000. Vincent Priessnitz. He was born in 1799 and he died in 1852. This chapter is called Foundations of Nature Care. Vincent Priessnitz was born a peasant and never went to medical school, yet he became one of the most famous healers of the 19th century. Besides curing thousands of patients of stubborn conditions, he set in motion the forces which would lead to the establishment of hydrotherapy as a legitimate medical entity which allowed the simple methods of natural healing at his time to evolve into naturopathic medicine of today. Priessnitz was born October 4th, 1799 in Grafenberg, a small village in the Sudetes mountains of southern Silesia, now Czech Republic. He was the youngest of 5 children. As a boy, Priessnitz received a rudimentary education at a Catholic school in the neighboring village of Friedhelm, but had to quit school to manage the family farm after an older brother, who was to take over the farm, died of brain fever and his father went blind in grief. His village was in the same region where the early water doctors Sigmund Hahn and his son Johann Sigmund Hahn had made extensive use of cold water in their medical practices. An old man in the neighborhood is said to have shown the young lad how to treat cattle with water, and the boy Priessnitz was credited with curing his father's hidebound, feverish cow by cold water application. Once Priessnitz was tending his father's cattle in a mountain pasture. He observed a stag, wounded in the thigh by hunters. hobble into a mountain spring and situate itself with the injured limb submerged in the cold flowing water. Each day the stag returned to treat itself. Great was his joy to observe the animal improve day to day till it finally got well. Interestingly, Grafenberg Mountain was part of the Hirschbad Kamm, or Stag's Bath Ridge of the Sudaites. These pine-forested mountains abounded in freshwater springs, one of which had carried Priessnitz's family name for 200 years, since an ancestor was killed there trying to rescue his lovely daughter from Swedish soldiers during the 30 Years' War. Overworked on the farm to the point of carelessness, Priessnitz experienced a number of accidental injuries, which gave him the opportunity to practice on himself the healing powers of cold water. At only 13, he sprained his wrist and found it felt much better under the cold stream of a water pump. Since he couldn't keep his wrist under the pump and attended to his chores, he wrapped it in a wet bandage, which he renewed quickly as it dried. Thus was born the Priessnitz compress, eventually adopted into the regular medical practice, and which remains to this day an entry in medical dictionaries. At 17, Priessnitz was run over by a horse-drawn wagon carrying a heavy load of wood. The local surgeon pronounced the critical injuries incurable and left the teenager to his fate. But Priessnitz, who had already become a kind of medical advisor to his neighbors, set the broken ribs himself by pressing his abdomen against the edge of an armchair and bound himself with a bandage wrung out in cold water. He took to his bed, moistening the bandage whenever it was dry and drinking large amounts of cold water. In 10 days, he was up attending to his chores. He wore the bandage for the next year, after which he pronounced himself fully recovered. Because of this and other similar experiences, he felt duty-bound to share his discoveries with others. Whenever he heard of anyone having a sprain, bruise, or other external injuries, he recommended cold water treatments, which he often applied himself. So successful was he that at the age of 19, he was invited to Bohemia and Moravia to give treatments. Throughout this time, he used only sponge ablutions, and he came to be known as the Schwamm or sponge doctor. At first, Priessnitz did not charge for his services and made numerous house calls. Eventually, experience showed him that people who came to his home and paid for treatment were cured the most quickly, so he changed his practice accordingly. 3 doctors from Frauwaldau incited the authorities against Priessnitz, since his success was diminishing their practices. Even in Priessnitz's day, according to Lust, there was a jealous medical profession. In the early years, he was frequently arrested and tried for illegal practice of medicine, but he was always acquitted because he used only water, not medicine. During one trial, a patient was called as a witness, and the judge asked him who had cured him. "They all have helped me," the patient answered. "The doctors, the apothecaries, and Priessnitz. The former helped me get rid of my money, and Priessnitz to get rid of my illness." One physician sent by the state to investigate Priessnitz frequently referred patients to Grafenberg thereafter. At one point, in frustration, the authorities, who were convinced Priessnitz must be employing drugs or sorcery, raided his place and wrecked it in search of his secret. They cut up all his sponges, but the mystery was not revealed. In 1829, when the magistrate in Frauwaldau prohibited him from using his bewitched sponge, Priessnitz replied, "This is even better. Then I use only my hands." Thus life comes to life. After this, Priessnitz never employed sponges, but used only the flat hand for applying water, which he found to be even more effective. These persecutions didn't embitter Priessnitz, who accepted them with equanimity and silence, but rather they spread his fame throughout the region, bringing him ever more patients. Soon he was forced to graduate from caring for external injuries to also treating many forms of internal disease. By trial, error, and astute observation, he invented new ways to use cold water against disease. Others, such as the Hans and the great water cure propagandist Eucharius Ferdinand Christian Ertel had recognized the value of cold water for health, but they had not really understood its many possibilities. Philo von Walde listed 56 different cold water applications in his Priessnitz book. Chief among them was the wet sheet. In the words of James C. Jackson, if Vincent Priessnitz had never done anything else for mankind but to have discovered and brought into use this form of hydrotherapy, he would have done enough to make him immortal. By 1826, he had opened his own Hydrotherapeutic institution, and in 1829, the first year records were kept. He had 45 patients in residence. By 1833, this number grew to 200, increasing to 800 in 1838 and 1600 in 1840. Besides members of royalty and clerical dignitaries, Priessnitz eventually counted such luminaries as Chopin, Gogol, and Napoleon III among his patients. During this period of phenomenal growth and clinical success, complaints against Priessnitz from the medical profession escalated proportionately. By 1838, the pressure was so great that the Austrian government created a special commission to investigate Priessnitz. The commission, headed by Baron Turckheim, traveled to Grafenberg and made it an in-depth investigation to settle the matter once and for all, which it did. Turckheim's report to the Imperial Cabinet at Vienna is worth quoting. That Priessnitz is no ordinary man, even his enemies must admit. He's no impostor, but is filled with the purest zeal to help others whenever he's asked to do so, and he's practically fitted to do this. The number of those who call Priessnitz a quack and a man of selfish motives only constitute a small minority, and they're mostly doctors and surgeons from the surrounding districts whose incomes are reduced by his practice, and who therefore get up complaints against him. Unassuming, modest, ever ready to give his patients help, untiring by day and night, obliging, firm, and consistent in his actions, Priessnitz possesses qualities which are inadmissible in an impostor. Notwithstanding the most careful investigations, I've been unable to trace a single instance wherein he was activated by selfish motives. The Imperial Commission has pronounced unanimously against closing the Grafenberg establishment, as it has proved itself efficient in many ways. After this stunning endorsement of his practice, the Austrian government decreed that Priessnitz should enjoy the same privileges as medical doctors, and that henceforward no one should ever harass him. The government even went so far as to build new roads to facilitate access to his establishments. Ultimately, the Emperor of Austria bestowed upon Priessnitz a large gold medal for civic merit, the highest mark of distinction in Austria. Thus ended almost 2 decades of persecution and harassment, and Priessnitz was finally free to practice healing as he was fit. This is just a couple of pages of the chapter about Vincent Priessnitz, but as you can see, he was one of the original practitioners. He was not a doctor, although he helped a lot of people. The work that was instrumental in what we know hydrotherapy or water therapy to be today. As you can see, as you heard, he really implemented cold water therapy that he observed some of the early water doctors, Sigmund Hahn and his son, Johann Sigmund Hahn, were older than him, preceded him, and the extensive work that he did with people who came to see him was quite profound and quite instrumental in what we learned cold water therapy to be today. I hope you enjoyed this little snippet from the book The Nature Doctors and the history of where cold water all begins. Do share your experiences, what sort of cold treatments or therapies you implement, cold showers, walking in the snow, or anything else that you do. Thanks for sharing this time with me. I look forward to being with you again.